This program is presented by University of California Television. Like what you learn? Visit our website or follow us on Facebook and Twitter to keep up with the latest UCTV programs.
Thank you all for coming. This is Script to Screen. This is presented by the Carsey Wolf Center, Department of Film and Media Studies. And you'll notice these awesome Polytheater interns. They're the ones who actually put these events on with us. You know, you can see they're on camera. So say thank you to them after, more than Richard and I, which they deserve all the praise. Script to Screen is a series based on how the script gets translated to film and goes to the screen. So tonight, we're honored to have the writer and producer. So we get two different angles on the story and the script for tonight. So we're very excited. Please welcome Brian Nelson to the Polytheater stage. Thank you. Our next guest was Vice President of Media Development at Vulcan Incorporated. I have a lot of credits for you, Richard, so I'm going to have to read the card. He oversaw in feature films like this, Far From Heaven, starring Julianne Moore. Also documentary Strange Days on Planet Earth. No Direction Home, Bob Dylan. Evolution, the Emmy-nominated PBS series Evolution. But the single greatest career achievement Richard's ever created and done is become the executive director of the Carsey Wolf Center, which means he gets to run the Polytheater.
Well, you get to run the Polytheater.
Well, and he gets to be my boss.
You tell me.
So how awesome is that we get to run this theater? All right, so Brian, we'll start with you. What was it like seeing Hard Candy at the Polytheater tonight?
You know, I haven't seen it on a screen this large maybe since it came out. I mean, so it was kind of a thrill. Still looks gorgeous. You know, the one of the unsung heroes on this movie is the color timer. Those colors are amazing, and so it was a hoot.
And Richard, what was it like seeing it in your theater?
I actually felt the same way you did. I hadn't seen it on the big screen since 2005, and just to get a sense of it again and to get a sense of the intensity of it, you just can't look at it on a small screen and get the same feeling from it.
And watching the audience reaction, we were watching it together, the three of us, during some of the scenes, which we'll talk about, obviously. All right, so let's start at the beginning. So, Brian, what drew you to the idea of the premise of a 14-year-old girl, you know, preying on a pedophile?
Well, a lot of things. I mean, I was influenced by a number of earlier films. I'm a huge fan of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. There's an indie film from the early 90s called Ms. 45. That's a kind of dark vengeance story. I love Clint Eastwood's High Plains Drifter and the notion that there's, you know, who is this enigmatic man with no name who has, you know, this insidious plan for revenge, and at the end we're still not sure exactly who they were. I also was influenced by the Alfred Hitchcock film Shadow of a Doubt, where there's a teenage girl played by Teresa Wright, who is the only person who has figured out that her uncle, played by Joseph Cotten, is a serial killer. And they didn't even have that term serial killer when that film was made in 1942. But what they did have was character. What they did have was this intense story between these two actors where this teenage girl is the only one who can know or do anything about this, and what will she do? So that was all floating around in my strange little brain. I was approached by a producer named David Higgins, who had read my work, and we had gotten along great, and we were trying to figure out what we might do together at some point. And he said he had read this article, a newspaper article, about these teenage girls in Japan who would seduce men up to their apartment with the promise of underage sex and then beat them up and rob them. And David said, you know, I think there's something kind of interesting about you think that you should be afraid for this girl, and then suddenly, shortly, you realize, oh, maybe actually you should be afraid of her. And so we started batting ideas around, and after a few weeks, I had created about a 7-page outline for this film that was called Vendetta at that time. And then at a certain point, I changed the title to Snip Snip.
I like it.
And it was called that for quite a while, but at a certain point, David suggested, let's think about something else. He mentioned to me there was that sort of comedy heist film about cheerleaders who had planned to rob a bank that was called Sugar and Spice, and so he said, if we could find something like that, and so that's how I arrived at Hard Candy.
And Richard, from the producer standpoint, did your head explode trying to say this is the premise, or how
did
am I
my
going to
head
sell
explode
it?
over this premise? Well, I mean, David and Brian had already met. Brian had already written actually a very refined script at the point that we got it, and we'd been at Vulcan Productions. We'd been looking for a film that we could do for not very expensively, and we had read, I don't know, about 1,000 scripts, and nothing really hit. And then one day, there are actually 3 producers on this film, David, Michael Caldwell, and I, and Michael walked into my office and said, "This is a wicked little gem." I remember the words, and I went, "Yeah, sure." And I sat there and I read it in about, I don't know, an hour or less, turning the pages, and ran into his office, sort of my tongue hanging out, and said, "This is fantastic. This can be done for what we're talking about. We can actually do this."
1,000 scripts.
Mm-hmm.
And most of them, I assume, weren't that good.
Drek.
Another good sign for you, there's hope out there. You write a great script like this, you will attract producers and talent. Just keep that in mind, aspiring writers. So what were the challenges for you, Brian, writing a script? Because it's 2 characters fundamentally in one room, the whole entire script.
Well, my background, actually, I trained as a theater director. And our plan B, or maybe plan F, I don't know, if we exhausted all other resources, David Higgins and I thought, well, if nothing else, if we find no one who is willing to back this, then, Brian, a lot of actors, we could just max out our credit cards and shoot it on digital video, and Higgins said, and we can use my house. And so I wrote it with that possibility in mind, that if all else failed, holy cow, maybe I will direct this. And therefore, I spent a certain amount of time at David's house, and it is written to be. David has a rock garden in his in his foyer. I walked up on his roof, looked around.
His house is the Hard Candy house.
It is, and so on a certain level, that became unintentionally a tremendous asset to me, because often when you're writing, you are being a kind of novelist and engaging in this visionary act of, I don't know what it looks like, but I'm going to believe I do, and trying to imagine all the details in your brain. In this case, I knew every room of David's house really well, because I was thinking in every scene, do we have to leave the bedroom now? Should we go to the kitchen now? And so as I was writing it, I was also, in a way, staging it. I was blocking it like I would a director, and thinking about, I know one house, which most of the film is, feels like a limited thing. But on a stage, I only have one stage, and yet I move people around like gangbusters and create all these kinds of different pictures. So what is every possible little bit of visual strategy that I can create to bring that off? And then, of course, that was immeasurably helped by the fact that then Higgins and I went out and found David Slade, our incredibly talented director, who can make a girl looking through a file cabinet look like the Bourne Identity. And his ability to bring visual signature to the piece meant that, it's often for many people only later that they go, oh God, I guess there were really only like two locations in this movie. But certainly that was a big issue during the writing of it, to make a virtue of the fact that it is contained, and yet never let people feel like, oh God, it's so contained. Sometimes you'll see scripts and people will say, it feels like a play. And having come out of a theater background, I'm very alive to that. So everything that I've ever learned about trying to keep a scene moving and trying to create visual interest, even in the smallest, most drab of circumstances, and character interest, and obviously suspense interest, I just try to pour it all in there.
Yeah, you did in the other movies, like 30 Days of Night, Trapped. They were trapped hiding from the vampires. The Devil, they were trapped with the devil.
Certainly that is one thing that people come to me now for. Since Hard Candy, the things that I'm approached for, I was saying this to you earlier, I'm approached for about 5 different things. Producers typically call me up now because they are looking for a story that either involves a psychopathic killer, a brilliant teenage girl, subversive sexuality, an internet-based thriller, or most of all, contained. Yes, we only have so many sets, or we only have so much money, and this is a guy who's shown he can make that work.
And from your from a producing standpoint, what was it the script's only going to take place in one room? Did that affect you when you were dealing with the director, or how it was going to shoot? Because you only had 18 days, too. Yeah,
we shot it in 18 days. I mean, the thing about, if you think about this movie as opposed to other movies, there were really, when Michael and I came on board, there were, I guess, 5 of us. We were the 5 Musketeers, or whatever that would be. And we, from that day on, we basically hung together and tried to figure it out. And when you make a very small movie, I mean, there's no real hierarchy. There's no redundancy in the team that's making it. Everybody's got a job to do, and everybody does it. So it's sort of halfway between my documentary life, which is really small, and the larger films that we've done. And because I think the communication among all of us was so good, it was actually really easy to do. There were creative tensions. There always should be creative tensions, but we really moved it forward very quickly.
It must have created such an intimacy on the set, though, with each other.
Excuse me?
And much amazing intimacy with all the crew and the actors.
We felt like the little engine that could. I mean, because yes, as you said, I mean, we had an 18-day shoot. We had $1 million. We hired, one of our producing team was a guy named Hans Ritter, whose basic job was to convincingly, repeatedly, inventively lie to us about how much money there was left. No, we don't have any more. But then, when push came to shove, oh, well, maybe I have a little more, but only when we really needed it. His job, in a way, was to protect us from ourselves. We shot this on a funding model as far as the crew that some people have called the indigent model.
Well, there was a production company called Indigent, which was Independent Digital Entertainment, right? And their model was this model, which was basically a sharing of the revenues from first dollar. We all shared. So we invested in it, and everybody shared from $1, which is an unusual model, to put it mildly.
But this was also part of what helped the rapport and the atmosphere on the set.
Because everybody had equity.
Because crew were told, for example, all right, we will pay you this amount, which might be a decent, respectable amount, or we'll pay you less, but we will give you, a fraction of a point or whatever, depending on the size and nature of your job. We'll give you some portion of the return in the back end. And that was one of the signals to us that we really had something great, because first of all, not only did a lot of crew initially say, you know what, yes, we will work for less and take an investment in this. But not only that, the people who didn't say that initially, after 3 days, they were in. After 3 days of watching on the set and going, when the sound guys was like, no, I need the money. But after 3 days, he was like, you know what? You can give me a little less money. I want a piece of this. So that was also a factor in creating this great energy, this great sort of can-do-it spirit that we had.
It's amazing you mentioned sound, because the use of sound in this film was amazing to me. The sounds of her surgery, of course. But the sound effects, because you didn't see a lot of this stuff. Your sound guy was awesome. I don't know.
The sound, and I also want to mention, because many people don't realize, the score. There is a score in this film. It's not elaborate. It's maybe 18 minutes of music in the whole movie, but where it appears with, dare I say, surgical precision. It's incredibly restrained, and yet when it's used, boy, does it pay off.
So let's talk a little about Jeff. Your characters have two sides to them, which I love. He starts as, the predator and becomes the prey. Is that something that appeals to you when you're developing character, kind of duality?
Well, every character has to, by the end of a movie, discover something about themselves that they did not know. And if it could be the last thing that they ever wanted to know about themselves, the thing that they've been trying to lie about themselves to, then all the better.
And Richard, Patrick Wilson just came out of Phantom of the Opera, which was every dream girl's Phantom. How many people saw Phantom, the movie, and have crushes on Patrick Wilson? What did you see in him? Like, wow, there's something about this guy who's, your wonderful Jeff.
Well, I mean, we actually cast Ellen Page first, and so we had Ellen, and we were looking. I mean, we needed somebody because we only had two. The movie is essentially two people. I mean, both of them had to have enormous range, and Jeff was somebody who clearly had enormous range. It was actually Angels in America that convinced us. Remember that? Not Phantom of the Opera or The Alamo, but the Tony Kushner
HBO
of Angels in America.
Yeah, exactly. And he was so good in that. And he was in the closet, coming out of the closet, and was deeply conflicted about it, and expressed it so well on screen. We were
in that film.
Yeah, in that film. Yes, he's obviously, and expressed it so well on screen. We thought this guy can handle the range that we're looking for. He actually said, I remember in Sundance, he said to me at one point that he had seen the writing of his lines is very dark, and he decided to bring some charisma and some likability to it if he could, and he really came with that intention.
Which was what we were praying for.
Exactly.
We had, I cannot give enough props to Patrick for not just his craft, but also his daring, because it took a while to find this actor. And there were a lot of actors who did not want to be this guy for even 18 days. And just in terms of his daring, in terms of the fact that he was willing to, frankly, look like shit in certain moments, that, we were willing to, try to make it as painless as possible. But he would say to the crew, just tie the knots, and I'll let me worry about it. So his hands are turning purple there. That's not makeup.
That's not makeup.
Yeah, I was going to ask that because I know.
And that was his in the scene where his hands are pulled back, and you see the color difference. Those are his hands. And he had asked for that. I mean, He really went for it,
and certainly in terms of that likability, that was so important to us. There were actors that were discussed at one time or another who were tremendously talented. And if they'd said yes, I was going to be like, I'll be happy about this. And yet, they would not have been right because they would have tipped you off that, oh, they probably did it. Whereas with Patrick, you spend an awful lot of time going, maybe she's wrong. Wait, he's so nice. He's so nice. I remember we did a little friends and family screening of a work print at one point, and I was teaching at USC at the time, and so I invited like a handful of my students to watch the screening, and they came up to me afterwards and said, we were spending the whole film saying, he can't be guilty. He can't be. And, that's what we needed.
Well, if at the beginning you felt he was guilty, you'd feel no sympathy. Immediately would have been cut off. Like, you wouldn't. Sorry for the joke. But Ellen Page, though, I mean, her shift was even more Jekyll and Hyde than his. Because the first act, she is so the sweet little girl, and we're terrified for her. Were you conscious of, like, how long that should be in the script? Because you were afraid that because we were all scared for her for so long, but if that went on too long, it might have been too much. Any concerns about that kind of shift?
You find it out on page 22. I feel like that's a pretty good place. If it had gone longer, I think you're right. We would be disturbed about that. But at the same time, you need to sustain that tension long enough that you are really invested in her. And then when things change, it is the last thing you expected. And we would get that comment in reads when we sent the script out, very often. People, I remember an executive saying to me, I'm mad at you because I had a mess of scripts and I couldn't get through them all, but it was Sunday at 11:30, and I thought, this one has candy in the title. I'll read this. And after 30 pages, I was suddenly aware I'm all alone in the house. And that was one of our early indications that, wow, this is maybe really going to go somewhere.
And Richard, in casting Ellen, were you a little afraid of how suspiciously she grabbed onto that character?
We love Ellen.
No.
So what did you see? I mean, you told me you screened a lot of actors. You saw a lot of actors.
Oh, we sure did.
Something, I think, between 400 and 500 in L.A. and New York and tapes, all 400 to 500.
You saw more than I did.
Yeah,
I had the benefit that
it's true. You got
that
to
your
sit
casting
back.
people screened a lot of people, and so forth. I saw maybe 200.
That was nothing.
And some of them were actually really, including actresses that who have gone on to work a lot.
We had a first choice before Ellen showed up.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'll get to why Ellen turned out to be that person after all. But what we would see frequently, especially what was difficult was seasoned actresses who had grown up since age 6 on a Hollywood set. We would think, well, this is great because we really need someone who can go the distance. And yet frequently they were actually maybe too seasoned, that there's a lot of wisecracks in this, and they would toss those off like baby Jennifer Aniston. They were so impregnable and brassy that you didn't fear for them. On the other hand, if we would sometimes see people who were extremely new to performing, and you would fear for them, and holy cow, that's all you would do is fear for them. It would be unbearable to watch them go through what Haley has to go through. And so when we found Ellen, she had done a number of indie films in Canada, little television work in Canada, was completely unknown down here. But that had given her just enough seasoning that, she was rugged, but she also has obviously this incredible vulnerability, this incredible openness and wit and intelligence. We really lucked out. One of the things that struck us when she came in to read was, I remember Michael asked her, so do you have any literary ideas about this feeling? And I remember, David and I looked at each other like, what kind of question is that? But
she answered,
and she said, well, I was thinking about Joan of Arc. And she talked a little about Joan of Arc, and we loved that because on the one hand, Joan of Arc is a figure who puts on a disguise to do an incredible mission that no one thinks she could possibly do. And on the other hand, Joan of Arc might be crazy. And that balance was really inspiring to both her and us.
But I mean, we actually that when she came in to read, we had actually seen her already. We remember.
Oh yeah, there's that.
We got the. I mean, we actually saw her first on her agent in Toronto sent in a videotape, and actually, it was the videotape of her just reading the part that really just blew us away.
Well, I didn't. That's not where I thought you were going to go with this.
Okay.
So,
where was I going to go with this?
well, blew us away, and yet we were also really thrown because she had just finished an indie film. She was bald.
She was bald. Yes, she was bald.
She had just finished an indie film where she was a cult member, and so we were really struck by this videotape. But we said, could we see one with hair?
Right.
And so about maybe a week and a half later, another videotape arrives. And it's great, except the worst wig ever.
Yeah.
And so, we're like, we don't want to lead you on, but boy, we're interested. But oh my God, what are we going to do? That wig, what are we going to do? So on the basis of that much encouragement, we
flew her out.
She came on down and read for us in person. And by that time, had grown in enough hair that she looked not unlike what you finally see. She actually had that kind of Gene Seberg look that is referenced in the script. So by that time, in fact, she had almost grown into the character visually as well as emotionally.
And I'm assuming, Richard, when you were casting, you realized this film would just fall apart if you didn't have the two perfect people.
Yep.
I
mean, I don't see any way. Look, those two people have to carry every scene. And every scene, as Brian said, every scene needs to successfully give that sense of tension and those reversals, that sense that something is happening unexpected in every scene. And those two people have to do that for 94, 97 minutes.
And I felt that way about every single person in this. That at the beginning it was just me and David Higgins. Then we went out and found David Slade. The wrong director could have sent this south so fast. Then we were lucky to find Vulcan. There were other producers and funders that we spoke to. But Richard and Michael and Vulcan were willing to not only fund us, but also work with us and let us make the film we wanted to make. And then, of course, Ellen, and then, of course, Patrick, and then, of course, the composers.
Yo Willems and the crew.
Yes, our cinematographer, Yo Willems.
Fantastic.
So many elements that I sometimes shudder to think, wow, if one of those elements had been changed, could have been a far different outcome to this film.
And can you explain how the relationship with David, the director, how did that work between all of you? Because a lot of times, writers don't even get to talk to the director sometimes in feature films.
David Slade was tremendous to work with.
He's fantastic.
He had come from a music video background. He had gone to art school. He has a tremendous visual imagination. But he had read a lot of scripts and was looking for what is going to be my feature debut. And we spoke to other directors. David clearly loved story when we spoke to him. And when we sometimes, would talk about, maybe this element of the story or that will change, he would get more tense than the writer, which is not typical for a director. I mean, I remember there was one small point at which, one plot detail at which, he pulled me into a corner and he said, "It's got to stay exactly the way it is. Don't let the bastards change your mind." So in that sense,
I was the bastard.
No. In that sense, he was a writer's dream.
But he was also, I mean, just to go to the other side, I mean, he was a dream not only because he was so strongly in favor of the vision and so strongly supported it and so strongly championed it. But at the same time, if you did make a good case, he would alter things. I mean, he could see it. And he wasn't simply wedded to his vision or a vision simply to be possessive. He wanted it to be better. And so he would actually evolve as ideas came forth.
I feel like we had an aesthetic, and it's an aesthetic that I try to look for in whomever I'm working with, which is, it's not about whose idea it was.
Right.
It's not about who won today's argument or whatever. Currently, at the moment, I'm a writer-producer on a show that's about to premiere on Starz that is called Da Vinci's Demons. And it's about Leonardo da Vinci and his lost adventures when he's 26. And there's a scene in one of the episodes that I love where people are talking about what's the truth of history that's going to be known about what's happened today. And Da Vinci looks in and looks to the other characters and says, the best story wins. And that's, in a way, was our aesthetic here as well. That, I will give an example of a suggestion that was not in the first draft that I'm very indebted to Vulcan for, was Michael and Richard asked me at one point, could we see Haley thrown off her game more at some point? Could we see her deal with something that she didn't expect? And that's where Mrs. Takuda comes from, because that neighbor was not in the first draft of the script. But, that was suggested, and I thought, they have a point. They're absolutely right. Of course, that would be interesting to see. What can I do? What can I create that would be fun to see her have to improvise and make up stuff that's completely outside of her elaborate plan? And I'm so happy that suggestion was made, because that scene with Sandra Oh, that sequence is one of my favorite things in the whole piece.
I was actually most scared for Ellen in that scene.
That's the whole point.
Yeah, and it was so brilliant because she's about to get caught. And in some ways you wish she would get caught. Because there's also the great moment when Jeff says, I will confess to the police if you let me go, which is another moment we were all rooting for. Is like, you got what you want. Is that something that was conscious, like a good emotional beat for you, saying,
Well, what's interesting is that's what you might think she wants, but that's not what she wants. A few moments before, she said, he says, why don't you just kill me? And she says, is that what you think I want? And he says, isn't it? And she thinks a moment and says, close. But her goal is not a confession to the police.
But the audience would have loved it. I mean, theoretically, in real life, that would have been. So we do have to bring up the castration scene. I think we have to talk about it. I thought it was great. I mean, it was a long scene, a great setup. Great.
18 pages.
Yeah.
It's funny, when I was writing, I remember thinking, today will be the day I write that scene. And actually, it was about 4 days later, because every time I thought, today I'm going to get to that scene, questions would keep coming up. The characters would suddenly say, wait, before you do that, there's one more thing you have to talk about. There's one more question you have to ask. And so it actually came much later in the script than I initially anticipated when I had written my outline.
But you always intended for that to happen. You just didn't know how you can execute it, or?
Oh, yeah.
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 Oh, that was another bad joke. Sorry. Unintentional bad joke. Were you, Richard, were you worried about how the audience would react for that sequence?
Well, I was very worried at one point because David wanted to do the entire scene in one shot. From beginning to end in one day. And as producers, that completely freaked us out. I mean, we were happy with the idea that he would try that, but we desperately wanted a second camera to be locked down so that if something happened, we could cut away. If you read the script, it's such a part of the script that you don't really go, oh, here's the castration scene. It happens so naturally, and it's so inevitable that you don't sort of land on it and worry about it. I was worried about the production. And then we talked about it and decided to add a camera, and then we were fine.
And Patrick, I mean, he is totally immobilized for the whole entire scene. As an actor, it must have been really challenging for him because he can't move, other his head. I mean, that was confining. It must have been really. Was it easier for him, or how was it for Patrick?
I don't think it was easy. At the same time, I will also say this is the sort of thing that many actors live for, you know, because
He acted the hell out of it.
it's not about, Patrick's an accomplished dancer. He can, you know, he was on the Full Monty in Broadway. So, I mean, he's been vulnerable in a lot of different ways. But this was...
That was before the film.
Yeah. But this was, this was something where all he had was his heart. And his, all right, maybe I'll say balls, in going to that place, in being willing to be that open and that helpless. Every time I see those scenes, I'm just filled with awe.
Yeah. All right, so now we have this wonderful film done, and we're moving to Sundance Film Festival. And there was a midnight screening, the big screening, and I've heard rumors that there were some technical problems that could have sunk it all.
Well, we had a little party before it, and we were all walking over to the theater, and David Slade had gone early, and he was unhappy with the sound. I can't remember whether it was a technical glitch or something else, or somebody had set the levels wrong or something. And so midnight came, and the line was around the block. I mean, it was around the corner and down the alley for the Egyptian. And we were there and waiting outside, and 12 o'clock passed, and 12:05, and 12:15, and we're standing in 15-degree weather. And I'm standing next to my boss, who's Paul Allen, who's a co-founder of Microsoft. And finally I turned to him and said, "Are you getting cold?" And he goes, "Yeah." So I thought, we better go in. So we just sort of walked in and walked up. And just at that moment, David finished whatever he was doing in the booth and fixed it. The doors opened, and everybody came in. So it wasn't that big a deal.
But if you had it here, you wouldn't have had that problem.
That's true.
Next time.
Next time.
So what was it? Were you watching the audience reaction? I mean, because here people knew what to expect, but no one knew what to expect. So what was the audience reaction after that screening?
Well, we knew to prepare, because there was a day, and maybe you were present for this. I just heard about this. There was a day where we showed dailies of the film to a marketing team at Vulcan, and I was told that someone passed out. Is that true?
No, she was pregnant and it was hot in the room.
Oh,
yes.
fine. Burst my bubble. Well, at any rate.
I was there.
Certainly, we've had all kinds of reactions. I remember we did it after Sundance, for example. We were picked up by Lionsgate, and they did a test screening, because this is a hard film to market. They were really searching around, trying to figure out who is our audience, how will we find them. They brought in an audience of 21 to 35-year-olds who were willing to see a scary movie, and showed it to them in Woodland Hills, and did a focus group afterwards. And one of the things I'll never forget was the moderator conducting the focus group said, so tell me what you think about this movie. And the women in the test group all said things like, "Oh my God, this should be shown in sex education classes." and the men to a man all looked at her and said, "She should be caught."
So to answer your question about Sundance, because nobody knew quite what to expect, the lights went up and the place was dead silent. I mean, and the ushers in Sundance, for some reason at this film, were all male, and they were supposed to be sort of standing at the rows, and they were all sitting on the floor with their legs crossed.
Similar reaction here, I noticed, by the way.
Well, and it is not a film for everyone.
No.
And our second screening at Sundance, there was not at midnight. It was I think an afternoon screening, and there was a Q&A afterwards. And at the end of it, we were talking about this guy earlier too. At the end of it, there was this massive guy in a giant parka who, like, if you were casting the Unabomber, you might cast him. He had he was reading off index cards that he'd been scrolling, and he just looked at us and said, "What gives you the right to make a film like this?" we looked at each other, and David Slade stalled for a moment, and
You answered the question.
Well,
I don't even remember what you said,
I
but you
don't know
did.
what
you did.
I
You
said,
defended
but
it.
I talked him down.
Yep.
He did not charge us. But we worried about it for a moment. He was a big guy.
Very big guy.
At any rate, it is clearly not for everybody. It's fun. I mean, I have friends who think, "You're so nice. Of course I'm going to see your movie, Brian." And I've had to tell them, you need to know what it is first. You don't do it out of friendship. Do it out of informed consent.
Yeah, I mean, I told Brian this story. I'd been making documentaries for a long time, and they're all sort of highbrow stuff: the brain, the mind, evolution. So I made this, and then we had made Far From Heaven, which is a really lovely film, and we made this, and my mother knew about it because I'd been telling her what I'd been doing, but it hadn't occurred to me to say, you should be careful. So my mother, who was then 84, took all her little friends from their little place, like 8 of them, from 80 to 85, and they tottered off to see this movie. And the phone conversation afterwards was really interesting.
So always tell your mom the truth. All right, so the movie had the reaction at Sundance. What was the process of selling it? Because now Lionsgate...
Oh, my God, it was wonderful. The movie ended at, 2:00 in the morning. We walked out of the theater. We were going... we went to... William Morris was one of our agents. We went to their they had a little condo in Park City, and we went to the condo. By the time we'd gotten to the condo, we'd gotten 3 phone calls from distributors. We got to the condo, we walked inside, and we got a phone call, and it was an English distributor who said, "I'm sitting outside of the condo. I'm not leaving until you sell me that movie." It was, and then we sort of, Lionsgate came, and a few other people came. We talked about it, and we had essentially sold the movie by 5 a.m. And it never happens like that, but it did to us. It was fabulous.
I was asleep by then.
I know you were. You didn't have to worry about it.
Wow, that's amazing. There was a lot of other films at Sundance too that year: Squid and the Whale and Junebug. So it seemed to be a really good year.
It was a good year.
A lot of quality films and stuff like that. So make good films, guys, and you go to Sundance. All right, so it's our last question. We always ask the same question of our guests. I'm going to start with you, Richard, because you know the question, and it's a little fair. We are a movie theater, so can you tell us about one of your favorite early childhood memories of going to the movies?
Favorite or most?
Or it could be anything you can connect to. It doesn't have to
Sure. The last scene in Old Yeller, where the dog dies.
What are you thinking?
That was it had a huge impact on me.
In what way?
I walked out of the theater devastated.
Oh, okay.
No,
okay.
I know. You thought I was going through the hard candy thing. No, I get it.
dogs.
No, this was, yeah. I have a soft spot for dogs. What can I tell you?
That's funny. I didn't see a whole lot of movies as a kid. I saw a lot of TV. We didn't go to the movies a lot when I was a kid. But I had the TV Guide schedule memorized. And I do remember my friends said they were going to the movies and I could come along, and this was so exciting because it was a movie of a TV show I loved. And so I remember, like, the first drive-in movie I saw was House of Dark Shadows.
Oh.
And that was the best.
Well, I want to thank Brian.
Sad, isn't it? But there you are.
Well, I want to thank you, Brian, and of course, Richard, for sharing your insights in this film. And thank you for the audience for all coming out. I hope you had a really good time. We are coming back in the spring, but we're not announcing yet what we're doing because it's not confirmed. But please come back for more Script to Screens and back to the Pollock Theater. And thank these interns on the way out because they're the ones who actually really made this possible. Thank you.
Thanks.